All right, so you wanted to really dig deep into uh, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and how it connects to this more recent book, The Trance. So we're going to be looking at like how these stories um, deal with seeing things from different perspectives and the whole idea of second chances.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the core of it.
So just to quickly recap, Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows the story. It's about Ebenezer Scrooge, this total miser, and he's completely changed when these ghosts visit him, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. He's forced to look at what he's done, what he's doing, and what'll happen if he keeps going down the same path. And in the end, he chooses kindness instead of greed, right?
Right, exactly. He sees the error of his ways. Classic redemption arc.
Exactly. And that's where the trance comes in, with this kind of interesting twist. What if, instead of just one night, Scrooge's journey was spread out across, multiple lifetimes? What if he got to actually live the lives of the people affected by his actions? That's what we're looking at here.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing premise.
Totally. So the prologue of The Trance introduces us to this character, Senator Nathan Hale. He's a lot like Scrooge at the beginning, super successful, but also ruthless. He creates these policies that seem efficient on paper, but they end up hurting a lot of vulnerable people. And of course, he thinks he's above it all, like the consequences don't apply to him, until he starts having these vivid, disturbing dreams.
Yeah, the prologue sets up the big question. Can someone really change when their success is basically built on other people's suffering? That's the core of the story. Nathan Hale, just like Scrooge, is stuck in a system that actually rewards him for not caring about others. These dreams are they're like a wake-up call, maybe.
Definitely. So in chapter 1, Nathan has his first dream, and it throws him right into the life of a manual laborer, someone struggling with chronic pain and poverty.
Mm.
And he doesn't just see it, he feels it all. The aching body, never having enough to eat, the exhaustion that just drags him down. There's even this detail about an empty bottle of painkillers. It's simple, right? This guy can't even afford the basic relief he needs.
Exactly. And that visceral experience is so important for Nathan. It's mirroring how the ghosts in A Christmas Carol make Scrooge experience the results of his actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about understanding it intellectually. It's about feeling it on a deep personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes even deeper than that. This laborer has a teenage daughter, and Nathan sees how worried she is, how much she's carrying because of her dad's struggles. It really drives home that his policies don't just affect one person. They have these ripple effects on families, creating all these unintended consequences. Then, chapter 2 takes Nathan to a hospital bed. Now he's an elderly man, alone, and dealing with a serious heart condition. This time, it's not just poverty, it's the fear and isolation that comes with it, too.
It's like each dream, just like those ghostly visits in A Christmas Carol, is showing Nathan a different side of what his actions have caused. But we're still left wondering, is he going to actually change, like Scrooge did?
Right, it's the big question hanging over everything. And we see that this man's suffering is directly because of Nathan's healthcare cuts, the long wait times, the fact that he's not getting the care he needs, the feeling of being a burden on the system. It's like Nathan's being forced to confront the real human cost of his decisions. No more hiding behind statistics or abstract ideas about efficiency. Then we get to chapter 3. And this is honestly probably the most emotionally intense dream. Nathan finds himself as a single mom trying to take care of her 2 young kids in this practically empty apartment. The desperation is just palpable. Empty cupboards, barely any food, and you could just see the constant worry in her face. He feels that fierce love she has for her children, but also the crushing weight of a system that has totally failed her.
Yeah, this dream really brings to light the moral dilemma at the center of the trance. Can someone who's benefited from a system that creates this kind of suffering ever really understand it or atone for their part in it? It's a tough question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we learn that the reason she's in this situation, she's been evicted, is because of Nathan's housing policies. So he's literally living the consequences of his own actions. Chapter 4 puts Nathan into the body of a factory worker. His body's just wrecked with pain from some old injury, and the setting is bleak, noisy, dangerous, the kind of place where workers are treated like they're disposable. He goes through the endless exhaustion, the physical toll of the work, the total lack of control over his own life.
I think this is where things start to shift for Nathan. He starts to see a pattern, like connecting his policies to the real suffering of individual people. It's the beginning of him understanding how everything is connected, His actions, the consequences. It echoes what Scrooge goes through.
Totally. He realizes that his deregulation policies, the ones that were supposed to increase efficiency, are directly responsible for the unsafe working conditions and the lack of protections for these workers. The system he built is grinding down the lives of the people at the bottom. Chapter 5 throws him into the harsh reality of homelessness. He gets to experience it all firsthand: the cold, the hunger, the vulnerability, how people on the street just become invisible to everyone else.
This one really forces him to confront the systemic issues behind homelessness. He's not detached anymore. He's right there in it, experiencing the dehumanizing effects of the very system he helped to create. It strips away that comfortable distance he's used to.
Yeah, and it's not just about being physically deprived. It's about the loss of dignity, feeling like you've been thrown away by society. It's a complete contrast to his life of privilege and power. Then in Chapter 6, we find Nathan in a courtroom. But this time, he's not the powerful senator. He's the one on trial, shackled, waiting to hear his fate. And we learn that this guy's life has been shattered by debt, losing his job, and finally he commits a crime out of desperation. As the judge declares him guilty, Nathan feels the crushing weight of a justice system that's all about punishment, not rehabilitation.
This is a powerful scene because it's like all of Nathan's experiences up to this point are coming together. He's finally facing the full weight of the system he created, the system that traps people in this cycle of poverty and crime.
Right. And to make it even more intense, we find out that this man's downfall is a direct result of policies that Nathan himself supported. It adds a whole other layer to his growing guilt and sense of responsibility. Then we get to Chapter 7, and it's kind of chilling because it shows the limits of empathy. Nathan's now living the life of a man who's been denied life-saving medical treatment because of the very policies he fought for.
Right. It brings up a really important question. Is empathy even enough to change a system? Can just understanding how others are suffering actually lead to real change? Or does it take more than that? Action, sacrifice, being willing to dismantle the structures that cause this inequality in the first place.
It's a huge question. So Nathan's going through this man's despair, knowing he's going to die simply because he can't afford the care he needs.
Yeah.
It's like even when Nathan wants to help, the system he created won't let him. In Chapter 8, we find Nathan in the life of a young man who's about to be evicted. We see the crushing burden of debt, the fading hope, the struggle to hold on to any kind of dignity when everything's stacked against you.
This one really emphasizes how cyclical poverty is. It's not just about individual choices, it's this whole web of systemic factors that traps people. And Nathan's starting to realize that his old way of thinking, where individual responsibility is everything, just doesn't cut it.
It's so true. And this dream is particularly powerful because it shows the psychological toll of poverty, how it eats away at your self-worth, and the ripple effects, strained family relationships, social isolation, dreams getting crushed. And again, this man's situation is directly tied back to Nathan's policies. The systems he designed to make things more efficient are actually causing suffering. Chapter 9 takes us into this really interesting exploration of invisibility. Nathan's now a janitor, someone who works incredibly hard but is basically invisible to the people he serves. It's not about material poverty this time. It's about this lack of recognition, the dehumanizing experience of being unseen and unheard.
What's striking here is how this dream shows the limits of empathy again. Nathan's witnessed all this suffering, but he's still operating within a system that makes certain lives invisible. It's like a wake-up call saying that real change isn't just about shifting your perspective, it's about dismantling the structures that create these inequalities in the first place.
Exactly. It forces Nathan to confront how he's contributed to this system that values profit over people, efficiency over compassion. Then we get to Chapter 10, and this is a real turning point for Nathan. He finds himself back in his own life, but he's older, more worn down, and he's about to face a reckoning. He's confronted by Ava, his closest advisor, and she doesn't hold back. She tells him straight up about the damage he's caused, the suffering he's inflicted, how morally bankrupt the system he's built really is.
That confrontation with Ava is so important. It's bringing an outside perspective into Nathan's internal struggle. It's not just about his feelings of guilt and empathy anymore. It's about the objective reality of the harm he's caused. He can't ignore it any longer.
Right. It's this devastating moment where he's forced to face the consequences of his actions in a way he can't escape. It's like all the lives he's inhabited, all the voices he's tried to silence are coming back to him at once. The world he built is falling apart around him.
It's interesting how the trance uses Ava to kind of like hold Nathan accountable.
Yeah.
She's like the voice of all the people whose lives he's messed up, the people he ignored before. Her words are like a mirror showing him the ugly truth of what he's done.
Yeah, for sure. And the epilogue of the trance shows us Nathan Hale after he's been transformed. He gives up his life of power and privilege and instead dedicates himself to taking apart the very systems he created.
The epilogue kind of brings us back to that question from the beginning. Can someone really truly change? It doesn't say it outright, but we see it in what Nathan does. He gets rid of his wealth and works really hard to undo all the harm he caused. It's pretty different from how Scrooge changes in A Christmas Carol. Scrooge's change is like immediate and dramatic.
Right, it's a total 180. There's this one scene in the epilogue that really got to me. Nathan's working in this really simple office, just surrounded by files and papers. It's a world away from his fancy senator's office. His whole focus has shifted. He's not trying to climb the power ladder anymore. He's actually trying to help the people he used to disregard.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that Nathan's, atonement isn't over. It's not a done deal like with Scrooge. His journey is open-ended. It's like, it leaves you thinking. True change is a journey, not just a destination.
I like that. And the epilogue doesn't sugarcoat how hard this new path is for Nathan. He runs into resistance, things don't always go his way, and there are moments where he doubts himself. But he keeps going. He's driven by this new sense of purpose.
That element of struggle is really important. It shows how hard it is to actually change things on a systemic level. It's not easy, it's not quick, and a lot of times it means going up against really powerful structures.
Totally. There's this scene where Ava visits Nathan in his new office. She acknowledges all the good work he's doing, and it just felt really powerful. Like she's finally validating him. It shows that even the people who are critical of him can see that he's sincere in his efforts.
Yeah, and it reinforces that whole idea that change is possible. And it emphasizes how important accountability is. Even though Nathan has changed, he's still responsible for the harm he caused. True change means owning up to your mistakes.
For sure. The epilogue ends with Nathan standing at his office window, looking out at the city lights. It's the same image from the prologue, but his perspective is completely different now. He doesn't see the city as a symbol of his power anymore, but as a reminder of all the lives he's affected, for better or worse.
Yeah, that shift in perspective is key. It shows how deeply he's changed. He's not looking at the world from a detached place anymore, but from a place of empathy and responsibility. He's connected to the consequences of his actions now.
So what does all this mean for us, right? Both A Christmas Carol and The Trance explore how powerful it can be to see things from different perspectives, how facing the consequences of our actions can lead to real change. But The Trance takes it a step further. It suggests that real change isn't just about feeling sorry. It's about actually doing something to fix the damage you've caused. We've looked at all these parallels between the two stories. They both deal with redemption, with the possibility of change. But The Trance leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. Is true change possible, even for people who have benefited from unjust systems? Nathan's transformation is a journey. It's not like flipping a switch. The epilogue gives us hope, but it's not a simple happy ending. It makes us think about our own roles in these systems and what we can do to make things better.
What's really fascinating is that The Trance doesn't give us easy answers. It doesn't say for sure if Nathan will be able to dismantle the systems he helped create, or if his efforts will make up for all the harm he caused. Instead, it leaves us with the responsibility of figuring out those questions for ourselves. It pushes us to look at our own part in these unjust systems and think about what we can do to make things more fair.
And that, I think, is what makes this whole deep dive so powerful. It's not just about analyzing two stories. It's about using them to look at our own lives, our choices, and our own potential for change. As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one last thought. The ambiguity of Nathan's journey in The Trance is intentional. It forces us to grapple with how complex change really is on both a personal and societal level.
There's no easy fix, no magic formula for undoing harm. It's an ongoing process that requires you to constantly reflect, be aware of yourself, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions and biases. It's challenging us to go beyond just feeling bad for people and actually do something to make a real difference,
Yeah.
It's a call to action, like, hey, we all have a part to play in creating a world that's more just and fair.
Both A Christmas Carol and The Trance are really powerful stories about, changing who you are and finding redemption. They remind us that even people who are deeply stuck in these systems of inequality can actually change their views and try to build a better future.
And it's super important to remember that change isn't a one-time thing. It's a process. It takes continuous effort, Looking at yourself, being willing to face some uncomfortable truths about who you are and the systems you're part of.
So as you think about these stories, think about how they might connect to your own life. Are there places where you can shift your perspective a little? Are there things you can do, even small things, to help create a world that's more just and compassionate?
Yeah, these stories definitely offer a glimmer of hope. They remind us that change is possible both for individuals and for society as a whole. They kind of inspire us to work towards a world where compassion and empathy guide our actions, and where stories like the trance aren't warnings anymore, but like reflections of a society that's actually learned from its mistakes.
Totally. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.